You can join Michael Gove, Katy Balls and Kate Andrews for a live edition of Coffee House Shots with special guests Robert Jenrick and Jonathan Ashworth. Tickets are selling fast, so get yours before they're gone at spectator.co.uk/coffeehouse-live.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots, the Spectator's daily politics podcast. I'm Katy Balls and I'm joined by Michael Gove, Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogrund. Now, thank you both for joining Spectator HQ today. We're here to talk about your book, Get In. Patrick, the last one was left out, which is also obviously about Labour not making it to power. How was it different going about it this time?
Well, we did initially try and convince our publishers to call it Write-In, but they thought the concept of a right of the Labour Party was slightly too convoluted for the big table browser at Waterstones. It's been a very difficult process, because last time we were different, and in some respects difficult, because last time we were writing the post-mortem of a project that had failed. The entirety of Jeremy Corbyn's kitchen cabinet and the broader left was sat at home with nothing to do, sat on their computers with lots of documents to leak and grudges to litigate with us. This time we have been, for the best part of a year, actually a year exactly, from the first interview to the proof going to print, we've been speaking to people who at various points have been preparing for government and just getting to grips with government. And when a party's in the ascendant, that sort of level of candour and frankness has been difficult to obtain in some respects, and people have been cagier, but I think we managed to crack it in the end.
Yeah, I think you've done a pretty good job there. And when we look at the serialisation, various disclosures so far, the idea that Starmer's closest aide thinks that he is a caretaker, so HR manager type figure, and then also I think looking inside the Sue Gray story. And of course you've also caused a row over lockdown. Gabriel, can you talk us through that story?
I can, and I don't want to break through the fourth wall too much over here, but I'll give you the Spectator an exclusive. It was entirely inadvertent on our behalf. I'll pay credit to the editor of the Sunday Times, who was examining the tome and identified this detail that Starmer had received the help of a Shakespearean actress to improve his performance and delivery, Leonie Mellinger. She'd starred opposite Laurence Olivier in the past, and Starmer came calling in 2017, and my editor was just keen to learn a little more. And so I contacted Leonie only a week ago. I mean, we literally have one sentence dedicated to her in the book, but what she divulged and a picture she happened to supply has unwittingly ended up fueling this allegation that she broke lockdown, that Starmer himself may have fallen foul of some of the COVID restrictions. So we're entirely blameless in this. We wish we could say that we had in any way conceived of the number one scoop in our own book. But
almost buried.
But it had nothing to do with us.
We thought when we put it up on Saturday evening, when the rest of the serialisation went up, we thought, there's some of this will make difficult reading for Downing Street, but at least this nice story about Keir Starmer finding his voice and, this woman who has lots of nice things to say about him, that'll take the edge off. Little did we know that one throwaway line in it would cause, give CCHQ something to do for the best part of a week. So there we are.
If you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you'll get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
But one of the things about this book, which I very much enjoyed reading, is that there are so many golden nuggets that you've prospected for, so many diamonds that you've mined, that inevitably people reading this book will find within it, as with the Leonie Mellinger story, all sorts of ways of either potentially causing trouble, but certainly better understanding Starmer, his team, and the government. Because on almost every page, as a reader who obviously takes an interest in politics, and having practiced it myself, I'm fascinated by the personality stories, but it gives you a depth and richness to understanding the tensions within the Starmer project that we've seen played out over the course of the last 8 or so months that they've been in government. So some of the things that may perplex the outsider are better explained once you appreciate, at least two key things about Starmer. One is that he is dedicated to winning at all costs. And the second is that while he makes mistakes, he learns from them in order to pursue that victory at all costs strategy.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think he's at once an infuriatingly slow learner in that he is, throughout this story, often the last person to reach obvious conclusions that his more political aides and intimates have come to months and months before. But once he comes to that conclusion, the correction is swift and it's brutal. Look at what happened to Sue Gray. I mean, you, a man of your erudition, Michael, will have noticed the epigraph, the famous Jeremy Thorpe line on the Night of the Long Knives, lay down his friends for his life. And you see that happen again and again and again. And it's that sort of, as you say, winning at all costs. And there is no mistake. There are no lengths he won't go to correct a mistake and learn, even if that means, throwing friends under the bus. And, people might say that's personally a not particularly admirable quality. But in a politician, it's that sort of remorseless, remorseless approach to politics that has served him quite well.
One of the things that comes out is that Starmer was the perfect candidate at the time after Corbyn fell, in that he had credentials on the left, which were sufficient to reassure the idealists, but he had an establishment pedigree in office, which meant that realists could see him as a plausible prime minister. But initially, as the book makes clear, he wanted to be friends with everyone. He wanted the old Corbynistas to fold their tents and join him. But he's forced to a realisation that he has to kill Corbyn and he has to terminate the Corbynista influence in the party. And the person who secured him the leadership, Morgan McSweeney, was the person who knew that always had to happen. But as you say, it took some time for Starmer to come to that recognition, as he did to subsequent recognitions.
That's quite right. I mean, there's this very filmic moment in the book where McSweeney gathers the great donors of the Labour Party's moderate wing and presents to them this slideshow, Operation Red Shield. It's almost as though it was all prepared to be subjected to proper history in due course. But in this, he identifies that Labour is composed of these coalitions to which you refer, the ideologues of the hard left, the people who McSweeney thinks Labour can do without. But then you have these two other wings, the instrumentalists, those who we'd characterise as being Blairite, who will always choose the most pragmatic course, and then the idealists, who have long been the kind of kingmakers within the Labour Party. These are the people who just want the world to be a little nicer. They weep about the plight of refugees. They think the economy ought to be more fair. And McSweeney said to Starmer, you need to win them and you need to patch them and the instrumentalists together, and that will endow you with control over the party. And I think that one of the things we learn about Starmer is he is pretty studiously disinterested in the stuff of politics and the Labour Party selectorate. He's happy to deliver a message, laser focused on that demographic. And it is only really after the Hartlepool by-election that Starmer is forced to consider whether there is another coalition, a more important coalition, one out there in the country that he needs to orient himself towards. And actually, it was as late as 2021 that he was texting Owen Jones, telling him he was better than that. Owen, you're better than that, when he was being accused of dragooning the party over to the right. I mean, he was sensitive to this accusation, and as Patrick alluded to, when he changes his mind, he is pretty decisive, and it was when he was staring his leadership, when he had this reckoning after 2021, that he then decisively shifts away.
And having secured such a sort of landslide victory, following his recognition of the logic of the McSweeney approach, the need to win back, in particular, hero voters, working class voters in the Red Wall, then it seems as though the first few months of the administration are wasted. In fact, are a series of setbacks and unforced errors. That can't all be blamed on Sue Gray. What lessons do you think Starmer has learnt from those few months, and what influence do you think Morgan McSweeney is now having on any new direction for the government?
I think you can see now that this is a more political, has a much clearer political sense of self. Now, you can ask questions about whether the growth agenda, what Starmer says about migration now, how that fits together, and how it, whether it's credible for the Keir Starmer of 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But clearly, Morgan McSweeney has politicised this government and given it a clearer sense of political identity. I mean, the first 100 days is one of the mysteries I think we haven't quite solved, because there are, as you say, there's a big and victorious body of opinion in Number 10 who blame it all on Sue Gray, and it's clear that she bears a lot of the responsibility. But ultimately, the book has to stop, or the book rather. The book will also stop with Keir Starmer, I think. But, the book stops with Keir Starmer because, as much as there are people who'll say Wahid Ali, whose largesse caused so much damage in those days, was a Sue person, he was also a Keir person. Morgan McSweeney and Sue Gray were both Keir Starmer people. And it's certainly true that as early as January, we were having conversations. January 2024, we were having conversations with people who were saying this Sue thing is a complete disaster. It'll never work in government. Ideally, we'd like to get rid of her now. And there was, for some people, the need to see the first 100 days go badly so Sue Gray can in effect be constructively dismissed. I think that's one of the things that happened. So it's almost by accident and by design. I think those first 100 days were bad. And also it's on Keir Starmer for sort of not really noticing that the office he'd set up wasn't working much earlier than the 4th of July 2024.
And I must just, if I might just briefly develop that. I mean, one of the episodes in the book we've examined is the Arlington group phase. This was in 2019 when Starmer was every Monday morning furtively going to the home of Jenny Chapman, his parliamentary colleague, to plot the path to power with a close group of confidants, and it was all very seditious. They'd trot into Parliament one after another so as not to be caught. But we spoke to an attendee of that first meeting who said that not only did Starmer not want to chair it, but he also didn't want to discuss the politics of his proposed bid. This was months before the reckoning of December, but he wanted to make sure that they had fully gotten on top of the campaign finance rules and the regulations, and he wanted to ensure that somebody was taking notes. And I think that something we learned during writing the book that surprised us was that, notwithstanding all of that and what those around him say is a detail-oriented approach towards politics, quite a procedural approach towards politics, when he won that election and headed into Downing Street, I mean, the cupboard was bare in terms of the plan. And I think we're shocked and not quite sure exactly how it came to pass that there was no grid for that first 100 days. I know it's one of the cliches of politics. As long as the grid's full, then everything's going to be fine. And there is more to life than the grid. But to have learned, as we have, that Starmer's tour of the nations was planned on the back of a fag packet because the person who did it didn't know whether they would themselves have a job, this being the Director of Communications. I mean, there's a sort of tension between the first version of Starmer, the stickler for detail, and then the Starmer of 2024.
An inevitable question is, what does Starmer really want to do with his majority? So he wants to win. He wants to win on the football field. He wanted to win in the courtroom. He wants to win this election and win control of the Labour Party and now the country. What for?
It's a really, really interesting question. And it's one we came a little bit closer to answering with the help of Peter Hyman, who obviously wrote the Prime Minister's 5 missions. Don't know if we still speak about those on Whitehall, but there you go. And one of the things Peter Hyman said to us, on the record in his own words, was that Keir Starmer's a very experiential politician, i.e. he comes to opinions hard and fast after seeing them. The example he gives is children going under general anaesthetics have their teeth out. But that, even saying that aloud now, that's not the same as a political philosophy. That's not a vision for the country he wants to run and shape in his own image. And I think it's fair to say that his politics, or a sense of Starmerism, is a felt absence throughout this book. Beyond the acquisition of power and beyond the Labour Party winning, which, by the way, as we all know, is part of the Labour's intellect, that sense of Labourism for its own sake, the Herbert Morrison socialism is what a Labour government does thing. But we don't really know what he wants to do beyond the sort of, let's have an effective Labour government. It's tricky. And, the man himself, we quote him saying there's no such thing as Starmerism and there never will be. So, that is himself saying that. So it's tricky.
And on that, Patrick, do you think that as government has become difficult, Keir Starmer is developing more of a sense of politics, what he wants to do, or do you think he's just absorbing what Morgan McSweeney and his supporters want to do?
I think if you look at what comes out the Prime Minister's mouth, much of it is from political aides like Morgan McSweeney and those close to him. Look at what he's now saying on migration. Very assertive, very robust language on the Tories failing on migration, that sort of thing. What he's saying on growth, that comes from Rachel Reeves. What is the Prime Minister himself saying that he gets up in the morning and he knows exactly instinctively what he says? Well, weirdly, it's the bits that are in deliberate conflict with other bits of the agenda, by which I mean the ECHR, which, you hear whispers from people in and around Downing Street that there has to be a reckoning on that if they're going to tackle small boats properly. The Chagos Islands, look at that as well. But, not to cite another author on Keir Starmer in an interview about our book, but Tom Baldwin, that's Keir Starmer's biographer,
Great writer.
Great writer, and he knows Keir Starmer very, very well.
Slightly different book.
A slightly different book, but it's people should read them together because you get a fuller sense of Keir Starmer the man, I think, from that book. But he says, Keir Starmer's politics are the ECHR, and why are half the cabinet and people in Downing Street having a pop at the Attorney General right now? Because he is also Mr. ECHR. He is Mr. International Law. So we do have some sense of what Keir Starmer believes. The big question is, that is authentic Keir Starmer, and the other bits are instrumental Keir Starmer, i.e. the stuff Keir Starmer is saying because he knows that that's what political people think will make his government a success. What wins out in the end, we don't know.
And Gabriel, from having done a year of interviews, I think Patrick has touched on some of the current tensions, but what do you think the future tensions for the next few years of the Labour government are going to be?
I'm going to say...
Lisa Nandy.
Well, if you want me to crowbar in what I'm led to believe is Michael's favourite line of the book, there is a moment shortly before Starmer became leader in which Morgan McSweeney said that Nandy had no chance of leading the party, and he derided her politics as being no gender, no queen, no borders. So that's a lovely trifecta, which I think distills everything that Morgan McSweeney isn't about politically. When you ask about what some of the tensions could be, I do think the cover of our book features Starmer and a mask of his face. And I think there is this question as to which Keir Starmer prevails in a given moment. I mean, there is the sort of Blairite tendency within him. There's Tony Blair uttered the line that what works is what gives effect to our values, or something along those lines. In essence, this idea that Starmer is happy to zig and zag if the ultimate outcome is victory and then being able to do things, and he always chafes against this idea that he has to commit to a given path, and so he's quite flexible. But then there are moments where he is utterly unbending, and actually there are so few of them in the book that when they happen they really are conspicuous by their presence. There's this particular moment in the aftermath of October the 7th. One of our fine sources endowed us with the entire WhatsApp of conversations within the leader's office after those appalling attacks, and it was in the days after that a number of his inner circle were saying, well, we need to convey more empathy with the Palestinians. David Lammy, now Foreign Secretary, said that Emily Thornberry had been given a real roasting the previous night on Newsnight because the party hadn't really refined its position on the destruction unfolding on the other side of the border. And I suppose there is always this critique of books like ours that they view history through the prism of advisors. Naturally, we are to some degree dependent on those who talk to us, but this was really one of those moments where that correspondence was insufficient, because it was very clear that nothing was going to change, because Starmer himself, having spoken to Merav Michaeli, the leader of the Israeli Labour Party on the day of the attacks, he was in a bomb shelter. Patrick used this word experiential. When Starmer experiences something, when he sees something, kids at Alder Hospital, speaks to somebody in a bunker, he just becomes a conviction politician and becomes utterly animated. And this was one of those moments. It was fascinating for us because gone was I'll subcontract policy and politics to McSweeney or whoever else. And you have this Starmer of conviction. And I would be interested in the course of the next 5 years when we see that.
It is interesting you mentioned Tom Baldwin's book earlier, and in Tom Baldwin's book, he talks about Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions meeting the parents of a victim and becoming evangelical on their behalf in a way that the young Starmer, as a natural defender rather than prosecutor, would have found dislocating. You mentioned also the way in which you've got so many people to talk to you. What was their motivation? So why do you think you've been so successful in having people who have so many fish to fry in government who've taken time out to spill the tea with you?
Look, I think ultimately, however inconvenient aspects of this book will be for Number 10 and those who run it, they have in this book bent the arc of history towards doing something very few leaderships of the Labour Party do, which is win an election handsomely and convincingly. So that's all. People always want those stories told. There are also those, obviously, who have been royally screwed over by this Labour leadership, who wanted to talk to us. But I think if people have read our last book on Jeremy Corbyn, we were surprised in the days and weeks after that lots of people on the left who would have otherwise been very suspicious of us says actually that was a very fair and reasonable piece of work. So I think people knew we were approaching this with a degree of seriousness, no matter how uncomfortable the serialisation headline is. If you ask the right questions and are furnished with the right information, people are always better served talking than not. I hope they talk to us again, at least after a little bit of time.
Might be a bit of a timeout.
But, I think there is grit in the oyster of this story, but ultimately, how would you describe it in a sentence? I think Matt Chorley's quote on the back cover is probably apposite. How one man rose from obscurity and took to run the country and took Keir Starmer along for the ride. If you are a fan of Morgan McSweeney or work with Morgan McSweeney, okay, it's a little bit insulting to Keir Starmer, but look, it's basically true.
On the subject of fairness and accuracy, I mean, Michael, you make an appearance in the book, so would you say that it was true to life?
Completely. So one of the many scoops, this is probably a micro scoop given how many big scoops there are.
Very humble.
Is the fact that I had dinner with the aforementioned Morgan McSweeney before the election at the home of a mutual friend who must remain anonymous. I explained to him that in the election forthcoming I would have to be incredibly vicious towards Keir Starmer and rude about those around him. But I found Morgan McSweeney in that conversation, as I think so many people have, modest and unassuming in manner, but implacable and determined in his desire to make sure that he could understand, in my case, how government worked from the inside, just as he'd learned previously how an election-winning machine should work.
Is there going to be a third book?
Well, some people have generously volunteered to resume our conversations for the third book. So I suppose if people are, amassing information and wanting to talk to us for a third book, it would be rude of us not to. I mean, ultimately the decision is that of Penguin Random House, but we hope we have fulfilled the terms of our contract adequately, that they would reconsider us.
What do you think the title might be?
I don't know. You might want to bleep this out, but someone did suggest "fuck off."
We've also got to get out.
Get out.
If that's what the British people's instruction is.
And with that, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Gabriel, for appearing today.